Nancy Zucker, the eating expert who's coming, that she can talk about college eating, but she should be mindful. What are we doing? We getting ready?
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Annie Stevens. I'm the Vice Provost at Student Affairs here at the University of Vermont, and I'm joined by
Jim Wojak, Director of the Wellness Environment and Director of the Child Psychiatry Division here at the College of Medicine.
And we wanted to join you today, mostly as a follow-up to an earlier webinar we did on August 9th, but also for folks who are around the country that are interested in the Wellness Environment program here at UVM, what we've been doing, how we established it, all in an effort to reach out to folks who may be interested in setting this up on their own campuses. Programs like this, maybe a model after it. And so Jim and I are here today to really walk you through some of that and answer any questions you have. So I know we have some questions from the earlier webinar, but we also want to make sure that we take in questions for you today. And we'll spend about 45 minutes or so trying to do that. So here we go. I'm trying to pull this off. I think if we just want to start off, Jim, with a couple of questions we wanted to follow up from the last time we had a webinar. And I'll ask a couple of these, and you can ask me as well. But how do you feel this approach might be applicable at a smaller institution? You know, there's institutions. We are about 10,000 students. We have about 5,000 students that live on campus. Those are all undergraduate students. So what do you think at a smaller institution, how that would play out?
Well, first, this question of scalability comes up on both ends of this continuum. How would it play up at a much larger university? How could it play out at a smaller university? It's easy to answer for the smaller university because we've in fact done that. Mm-hmm. The first year we had 120, the second year roughly 500, right, and now 1,200, and we could have been much, much bigger. In the fourth year we've decided to stay to emphasize excellence. So if you have a smaller university, the only decision you would have to make was what percentage of your campus would you want to have in this program. Myself personally, I think it's an achievable goal to have entire small campuses devote themselves to building healthy brains. But again, that's the level of decisions people like Annie and the provost and president would make, but quite easy to do it in a small campus. Larger schools, I've been reached out to from a number of schools that are in the 40,000 and 50,000 range, and that's also very enticing. And the solutions from them came to me by, we'd like you to consider helping us with this campus. So many of the very large schools would have multiple small campuses that come together to make their university. So you could attempt to do this on one campus, gain confidence in the experience, see its efficacy as we've seen, how well it works on our campus, and then you could decide if you wanted to move to another campus or not. Right. One thing I'd just like to add, the scalability includes scalability of resources, and by that I mean person power and the number of RAs that you'd want to train, the number of program coordinators you'd want to train, and then change agents in neuroscience and behavior change.
Yeah. It might be good, you know, as you're talking right now, I think it might be good to help those who are joining that might be new to this conversation about what really is the wellness program at UVM when we talk about that. And I think about, the academic component, we have a residential component to it, and then of course the co-curricular pieces that happen particularly right now within the residence hall, but outside the residence halls as well. So that might be helpful for folks to hear.
Yeah, so the wellness environment idea comes from really as the result of almost 25 years of research I've done in genetics and neuroimaging and neuroscience about how to help children who suffer from emotional behavioral problems, anxiety, sadness, inattention, substance use, and abuse. And it became very clear to myself and my colleagues around the country and around the world who do this kind of research that all of us are a little bit sad, all of us are a little bit anxious, inattentive, and aggressive. And certain ages of brain development, it's more difficult to negotiate life than others. And one of the most sensitive is college. So when I went to Annie, I proposed a 4-part program to essentially take my science from the clinic, from the hospital, and put it in a university setting. And the first was a course that we teach here called Healthy Brains, Healthy Bodies, Surviving and Thriving, which is the basic knowledge, skills, and attitude a young person would want to know about how the environment impacts his or her genome through epigenetic mechanisms, impacts on the structure and function of the brain, and then your brain is responsible for your thoughts and behaviors. So as you improve brain health, you improve thoughts and behaviors. So we teach this class and we arm the students with the neuroscience of exercise, the neuroscience of meditation, neuroscience of nutrition and sleep, alcohol and drugs. And we just say to them, you can make the decisions you want, but make them armed with the idea of how it would impact your brain in your subsequent arc of your life. Then in the residence halls, we built a series of programming that allowed the students to take the knowledge that they get in the classroom and test it. So we incentivize exercise behavior in our buildings through the creation of an app that provides them with the opportunity to learn 9-minute workouts, 10-minute workouts, to do Peloton bikes, to do fitness on-demand types of things, to have ability to work out in the gym or group fitness and be rewarded every time they work out. Similarly with mindfulness, nutrition, sleep, and mentoring. Those opportunities in the residence hall are built on an idea that I published years ago, is that if you offer young people a chance to make good decisions, if they're in an environment to make good decisions, they will. So that's part 2. Part 3 was this idea to use incentivized-based behavior change. So don't just say you can do yoga, pay them to do yoga. Don't just say you can work out, pay them to work out or eat well or sleep well. So we created a cryptocurrency which folks in the wellness environment can earn WeCoin for doing healthy things. That goes into a WeBank, and then they can buy We things, trips, clothing, food, etc. And the 4th part is to research all this. My entire career has been aimed at looking at public health research from a child psychiatry or emotional behavioral point of view. So every night the students fill out a 12-item survey. Here's 6 things did you do. Here's 6 things that are high risk that you might have done. And so we have outcomes research. We partner with Annie's team in the Division of Student Affairs. We know the institutional data, how well this works. It does. And now we're starting to publish data on the impact not only on the young people who live in our residence halls, but we also have 2,000 people who just use our app to look at the applicability in applications where there's not a residence hall component.
Yeah. I think what's really kind of interesting is that, I look back 4 or 5 years ago now when we first met. I mean, you were talking about how you wanted your daughter to have a successful experience, and she didn't want kind of the traditional experience of living in a residence hall where she was going to get a lot of pressure probably for engaging in alcohol or drugs and those things. And so you and I really came together around, right, that's what I want to for all of our students, is if they want to do this, how do we incentivize really healthy behavior for students and make that a possibility for them?
Yeah, and to that end, it's really important because certain of my colleagues around the country who are looking at putting these programs in, they'll sometimes say, well, we don't necessarily have this kind of neuroscientist or child psychiatrist or incentivized-based behavior change person. And I always say to them, there's neuroscientists at all these great universities who actually know this stuff, and we would share our curricular approaches with them. What needs to happen is the behavior change of the Division of Student Affairs and the residential life community to say, we might want to do something differently. And so the beauty of this program isn't coming from the neuroscience of health promotion, illness prevention, child psychiatry. It really is the beauty of this program. But the real beauty is the fact that a Division of Student Affairs and a university would say, let's do this by recognizing the health and well-being of the campus isn't necessarily where they want it to be. Now it is where they want it to be, so we feel very positive about the message we're sending to you guys.
Right. We've got another question coming in here. So the question is, how would you implement this in an institution with fewer resources available? And can you talk about the funding model? So fewer resources available. And I saw an earlier question that I thought was interesting is, how do you also talk about this with upper administration? How do you get that buy-in, which is, with any bigger initiative or even on a small scale, it is talking about changing culture on many campuses. And for me, it's always about student success. I think any upper administration, senior leaders will want to know, how do we know students will be better off? And how do we make sure that their experience is one that's better than it is now? And that was not a difficult piece to talk about. When you're talking about student health, I think everybody wants our students to be really healthy. And then once the senior leaders are bought in, I think it's a matter of prioritizing the resources and making sure that that happens. I know we took, in the early years, we took a chunk of our reserves from the Center for Health and Wellbeing that we have from student fees as well as residential life, and put in a pot of money that then helped Jim kick off some of these incentive-based programs in the residence halls while meanwhile he was teaching the course. So there's ways to find that, especially if it's a pilot program at first, find that piece of money, that chunk of money that can be set aside to start a program, get some good outcomes, get some early wins, even if you're starting small, and then scale it up like Jim talked earlier. But do you want to talk more about the funding model? Because you also brought in money to this.
Sure, but I want to piggyback on what you originally said, because when you walk into a president's office who had never met you before, and you walk into a provost's office who had never met you before, because although I'm a senior person at the College of Medicine, often the relations between the College of Medicine and undergrad campus is a bit binary. We do our thing, undergrad does their thing. But when I walked in with Annie's support and talked to our great provost, Dave Rozovsky, and our president, Tom Sullivan, there was no resistance, because it was around the two key points that I think most universities care about. One is substance use and abuse and the negative outcomes associated with that. And secondarily, something that I predicted in my writing years ago, that it'll become more and more common for an open dialogue about emotional behavioral problems or psychiatric health. And now you know that campuses can't begin to meet the need that they have to meet the needs of young people who are suffering from anxiety or sadness. The principal argument of this program is to diminish the amount of suffering that these individuals have. So I took that science and I went to funding agencies. Conrad Hilton Foundation was very, very keen to support us in reducing the negative outcomes on substance use and abuse. Helped us develop the app and helped us use the incentivized-based approach of stocking our store with these kinds of products. Annie can tell you a little bit more about how that played out on the broader institutional impact, but once it starts to work, there's other kinds of resources that universities, and you would better know than I, can start to look forward to in terms of how well your campus might function from retention and things like that.
Exactly. And we have found, it's a good point to raise, Jim, we have, as we've grown the Wellness Environment Program, we really are seeing excellent data, which is one of the reasons Jim and I are doing some of these informational webinars, and knowing that folks are reaching out to us, that we are seeing GPAs at a higher level, retention at a higher level, even for students who don't even stay in the program. So, and I think that's an important piece. It's also important to know that the students who live in the residence hall and are part of this actually just rank it number one on their housing contract, and we encourage them to do that. But it is then essentially a lottery about getting in. So it's not an automatic in, but what we often say is, even that, we can see really good data from those students. So even if they don't rank it highest, but they still are in the wellness environment, they're still benefiting from this type of program. So I think that's one of the key wins. And if they're senior administrators, I haven't met one that doesn't want to see higher GPAs, higher retention, better health of the community, better community relations around the campus, because of lower vandalism, lower secondhand effects, as we know from both drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, and corollary to that, in the wellness environment, the residence halls, massive reductions in substance use and abuse and conduct violations. I mean, really big numbers, bigger than most of my experiments. So this idea of creating these spaces where young people have the capacity to study, to be academically rigorous, to make good choices, it's actually borne out. It's been shown to be real. So that funding is nuanced through running a university. Other funding includes the kinds of grant generation types of things that we do that I'm sure others would do.
And then we also switched, remember about midway through, we also went ahead and switched the model for our residential life staffing that allows a more efficient way of program director. So residential life pays into that same model.
That's right.
That while Jim brings to bear academic resources to this, residential life then pays for the staff, the RAs, some of the programmatic pieces to it through the room rate. So there is truly a partnership in what the resources look like that go to the program.
Yep.
Yep.
You have another question for us, Karen?
Yeah, that's great. So the other question is, can you talk about Healthy Brains, Healthy Bodies course? So what does the actual 3-credit course look like? Is it required? How many students take the class?
Sure. So yes, to be in the wellness environment, you're required to take this class because, again, it's the mortar for the entire program. It's a signature program here at the University of Vermont, which is based on this idea that if you give students the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to make healthy choices, then at each moment when they're about to make that choice, they have clear and present understanding about the impact of a behavior on their genome, on their brain, and the arc of their outcomes. So yes, it's required. We have this year, I think, roughly 800 students who are freshmen. They're required to take HPHP. We have another 200 students who elected from other campus areas because of the course and its architecture. So roughly 250 kids in 4 different sections in the class. Very interactive. Every class starts with a meditation, ends with a guided meditation from professional yoginis and MBSR instructors. And then we bring in our own team who've substantially written genetic and developmental neuroimaging papers and science. And then we bring in world's experts who are super grateful to be here. In each instance, there are tests in the class that test the ability and the capacity